Family ties are supposed to be unbreakable, but cold, hard cash dissolves them effortlessly. Nathan Hayes was laughed out of his own family's estate. Reading handed the deed to a rotting, rat-infested woodland shack, while his cousins inherited millions. They called him a loser. They didn't know what slept beneath the floorboards. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Davies Morgan and Associates, a high-powered law firm perched on the 42nd floor of a downtown Chicago skyscraper. The mahogany walls seemed to close in on Nathan Hayes as he sat in a leather chair that felt far too expensive for him to touch. His frayed flannel shirt and scuffed work boots stood in harsh contrast to the people sitting across from him. To his left was his cousin Beatrice Caldwell, draped in a pristine Burberry trench coat, her phone buzzing incessantly with texts she deemed more important than the death of their great-uncle. To his right sat his step-brother, Greg Hastings, aggressively checking a gold Rolex Daytona and sighing every 3 minutes to let everyone know his time was highly valuable. At the head of the table sat Thomas Davies, a stern, grey-haired attorney who looked as though he had delivered 1,000 fortunes to 1,000 ungrateful relatives. He was currently reading the last will and testament of Arlo Caldwell. Arlo had always been the family's eccentric phantom, an industrialist who made a fortune in the 1970s through aerospace manufacturing. He had abruptly liquidated his public assets in the late 90s, retreated from society, and spent the last 20 years of his life in total isolation. Most of the family assumed he had gone completely insane. They stopped calling, stopped visiting, and stopped caring until his heart gave out at the age of 86, and the scent of money brought the vultures circling. Nathan was the only one who had actually cared. For the last decade, while struggling to keep his own life afloat after a devastating restaurant bankruptcy left him with $85,000 in debt, Nathan had made the 4-hour drive to drop off groceries for the old man. Arlo rarely spoke to him, often just grunting from the porch, but Nathan did it out of respect. He didn't expect a reward. He just wanted to do the right thing. Moving on to the distribution of the primary estate. "Mr." Davies announced, adjusting his reading glasses. Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with sudden interest. "To my niece, Beatrice Caldwell, I leave the liquid contents of my primary offshore trust, totaling exactly $14 million, as well as the penthouse in Gold Coast," Davies read. Beatrice let out a breath she had been holding, a smug smile creeping across her perfectly contoured face. "Well, he wasn't completely crazy after all," she whispered to herself. "To my nephew Greg Hastings," Davies continued, "I leave the entirety of my retained stock portfolio, currently valued at roughly $22 million, and the estate in Aspen." Greg pumped his fist subtly under the table. "Finally," he muttered, leaning back and shooting Nathan a patronizing glance. "Looks like my startup is getting that seed funding after all." Nathan swallowed hard. He didn't want millions. He just wanted enough to clear his crushing debt. A few $100,000 would change his life. He waited, his heart pounding a desperate rhythm against his ribs. Davies turned the page, clearing his throat. His eyes flickered up to Nathan, carrying a sudden, uncomfortable weight of pity. "And finally to my great-nephew Nathan Hayes." Nathan sat up straight. "I leave the property located at 42 Pine Ridge, Saranac Lake, New York, and nothing else." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the conference room. Nathan blinked, waiting for the rest. That's it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Greg was the first to break. A loud, booming laugh erupted from his chest. He slammed a hand on the mahogany table. "The Saranac property! Are you kidding me? He left you the rot box." Beatrice covered her mouth, trying and failing to stifle a vicious giggle. "Oh, Nathan, I am so sorry. Really, I am." Her tone dripped with venomous sarcasm. The property at Pine Ridge was legendary in the Caldwell family, and for all the wrong reasons. It was a decrepit, 60-year-old hunting cabin in the absolute middle of nowhere. It had no plumbing, no electrical grid connection, and half the roof had supposedly caved in during a blizzard in 2011. The family joke was that the land was worth less than the cost of the gasoline required to drive up and see it. Mr. Davies, there must be a mistake. Nathan pleaded, his face flushing hot with embarrassment. I took care of him. I was the only one who checked on him. There's no cash. No trust. I'm afraid not, Mr. Hayes, the lawyer said softly, closing the heavy leather folder. Arlo was very specific. He drafted this addendum only 3 months ago. He insisted you receive the Saranac cabin. He said, well, he left a brief note regarding it. Read it, Greg chimed in, wiping a tear of laughter from his eye. Please, I need to hear this. Davies hesitated, but pulled a small handwritten index card from the file. It says, to Nathan, you always understood the value of hard work. The others just want a handout. The cabin will give you exactly what you put into it. Classic Uncle Artie. Greg sneered, standing up and buttoning his bespoke suit jacket, giving the broke guy a literal pile of garbage to build character. Well, Nathan, if you need a loan for a tarp to put over your new mansion, my assistant has my card. Beatrice stood up, collecting her designer handbag. She paused by Nathan's chair, placing a patronizing hand on his shoulder. Look on the bright side, Nate. You can finally live off the grid. It suits your whole struggling lumberjack aesthetic. Goodbye, cousin. They left him sitting there in the quiet law office, the sound of their mocking laughter echoing down the hallway. Nathan stared at the deed pushed across the table toward him. 42 Pine Ridge. He felt a profound, burning sense of betrayal. Not just the money, he was used to being broke. It was the insult. Arlo had watched him struggle, watched him face eviction, and decided his final act would be to give him a worthless, rotting nightmare. Nathan took the deed, crumpled it into his coat pocket, and walked out into the Chicago rain. 2 days later, Nathan's beat-up 2009 Ford F-15 groaned as it struggled up the unpaved, mud-slicked mountain road in Saranac Lake. The rain hadn't stopped since Chicago, turning the dense New York woods into a bleak gray wash of misery. He hadn't come here to live off the land. He had come here to assess the damage. He had called a local real estate agent the day before, hoping to dump the property quickly. The agent had laughed. Pine Ridge, son, you'd have to pay me to list that toxic waste dump. The land is useless, it's not zoned for commercial, and the tear-down costs alone will run you 20 grand. Nathan's plan was desperate. Clear out whatever junk was inside the cabin, chop down some of the invasive overgrowth, and try to sell it to a desperate hunter for $5,000. Just enough to keep his creditors at bay for 1 more month. When he finally pulled into the overgrown driveway, the reality of his inheritance hit him like a physical blow. It was worse than he imagined. The cabin was completely swallowed by creeping ivy and black mold. The front porch was slumped forward, like a broken jaw, the wooden support beams splintered and rotten. Half of the asphalt shingle roof was gone, leaving the interior exposed to the brutal elements. The smell of decay, wet pine and animal droppings hung thick in the damp air. Nathan cut the engine, resting his forehead against the steering wheel. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a Facebook notification. Greg had tagged him in a post. It was a photo of Greg holding a glass of champagne in the first-class cabin of a flight to Aspen. The caption read, "Off to check on the new estate. Meanwhile, sending prayers to my step-bro, Nathan, currently fighting raccoons for dominance in his new swamp hut. Hashtag, blessed #family. First, Nathan's jaw tightened. Anger, hot and bright, flared in his chest. He shoved the phone into his pocket, grabbed a crowbar and a heavy flashlight from the passenger seat, and kicked his truck door open. "All right, Arlo," Nathan muttered to the empty woods. "Let's see your grand character-building exercise." He approached the cabin cautiously. The front door was warped and fused to the frame. Nathan didn't bother with a key. He jammed the crowbar into the gap and threw his weight against it. With a sickening crunch of rotting wood, the door gave way, collapsing entirely off its rusted hinges. The interior was a disaster. Soggy, ruined furniture covered in a thick layer of animal feces and wet leaves. The floorboards were spongy under his boots, threatening to give way with every step. There was nothing of value here. No hidden antiques, no vintage furniture. Just trash. For 6 grueling hours, Nathan worked in a blind rage. He hauled out moldy mattresses, smashed broken chairs into firewood, and shoveled out years of accumulated woodland debris. His hands blistered, his back ached, and his lungs burned from the dusty, foul air. By late afternoon, the rain stopped casting long, eerie shadows through the broken windows. Nathan was exhausted, sitting on an overturned bucket, drinking a warm bottle of water. He stared at the floor in the center of the main room. He noticed something strange. The cabin was built on a raised foundation, meaning the floorboards should have been hollow underneath. He had felt the floor sagging in the corners. But the center of the room, a rectangular area about 8 feet by 10 feet, hadn't squeaked. It hadn't sagged. When he walked over it, it felt entirely solid, like concrete. Curiosity piercing through his exhaustion, Nathan stood up. He grabbed his crowbar and walked to the center of the room. He slammed the heavy steel bar down onto the rotting oak floorboards. Instead of a dull thud of breaking wood, a sharp, ringing, metallic clang echoed through the empty cabin. Nathan froze. He struck it again. Clang! His heart skipped a beat. He dropped the crowbar, fell to his knees, and started tearing at the rotting wood with his gloved hands. The damp oak splintered easily, coming away in dark, wet chunks. Beneath the wood wasn't dirt. It wasn't a crawl space. It was a massive 1/4-inch thick plate of solid brushed steel. Adrenaline flooded Nathan's system. He scrambled to his truck, grabbing a heavy-duty framing hammer and a pry bar, and rushed back inside. For the next hour, he ripped up the entire center of the living room floor, hurling chunks of wood over his shoulder, until the full object was revealed. It was a heavily reinforced industrial steel trapdoor, completely flush with a concrete sub-foundation that shouldn't have been in a cheap hunting cabin. It was secured by a massive rusted combination padlock the size of a man's fist, bolted through a solid iron latch. Nathan stared at it, his breath coming in shallow gasps. What the hell is this? He tried the padlock. Rusted solid. He hit it with the hammer. It didn't even dent. Arlo's final letter echoed in his mind. The cabin will give you exactly what you put into it. Nathan ran back out to his F-150. In the toolbox bed, he kept a cordless DeWalt angle grinder from his days doing amateur metalwork. He slapped a fresh battery into it, attached a cutting wheel, and practically sprinted back inside. He knelt over the padlock, lowered the safety visor over his eyes, and pulled the trigger. The grinder screamed to life. As he pressed the spinning blade against the thick iron shackle of the padlock, a blinding shower of orange sparks illuminated the gloomy cabin. The metal fought back, the heavy lock smoking and glowing red-hot. Nathan's arms shook from the vibration, but he didn't stop. He pushed harder, teeth gritted, until finally, snap! The shackle broke. Nathan tossed the smoking grinder aside. He grabbed a heavy rag, pulled the scorching hot lock out of the latch, and threw it across the room. He stood over the heavy steel door. There was a recessed handle in the center. He gripped it with both hands, braced his boots against the concrete edge, and heaved with all his strength. The door was impossibly heavy, but as he pulled, hydraulic pistons hidden beneath the frame hissed to life, assisting the lift. The heavy steel plate swung upward, locking into place with a heavy click. A rush of air hit Nathan's face. It wasn't the smell of damp earth or mold. It was dry cold and smelled faintly of machine oil and old paper. The scent of a climate-controlled environment. He aimed his flashlight down into the darkness. Instead of a dirt cellar, the beam cut through the gloom to reveal a pristine, reinforced concrete shaft. A sturdy industrial iron spiral staircase wound its way down into the black abyss. Nathan swallowed hard, his hands trembling. He stepped onto the first iron grate. It was perfectly solid. He began the descent. Down, down, down. 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. The air grew cooler. When his boots finally hit the bottom floor, he swept his flashlight around. He was standing in a concrete foyer. To his right, a heavy electrical panel sat on the wall. Beside it, a massive lever-style switch wrapped in caution tape. Nathan reached out and pulled the lever down. Somewhere deep in the earth, a massive diesel generator roared to life, the vibrations humming through the soles of Nathan's boots. A second later, rows of high-powered industrial LED lights began to click on, slamming down the length of the room in rapid succession. Clack, 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 clack. Nathan dropped his flashlight. He wasn't in a cellar. He was standing at the entrance of a subterranean bunker complex, easily the size of a football field. The walls were lined with pristine, temperature-controlled glass vaults, and directly in the center of the room, sitting on a polished concrete pedestal, beneath a soft spotlight, was a flawless, midnight blue 1936 Bugatti, Type 57 SC Atlantic, one of the rarest cars in human history, currently valued at over $40 million alone. And that was just the first thing he saw. Nathan's breath caught in his throat, his lungs refusing to exhale. For a full minute, he simply stood at the base of the spiral staircase, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what lay before him. He slowly stepped forward, his boots clicking against the polished epoxy floor. The Bugatti Type 57 SC Atlantic was flawless. Its teardrop silhouette and riveted dorsal seam gleamed under the overhead lights. Nathan wasn't a car expert, but he knew enough to understand that only 4 of these were ever built, and 1 had been lost since World War II. He was looking at La Voiture Noire, or at least Arlo's incredibly well-kept secret acquisition of a similar masterpiece. But the car was merely the centerpiece. To the left of the vehicle stood a row of massive Diebold Nixdorf commercial bank safes, their heavy steel doors left slightly ajar, as if Arlo had been down here just yesterday. Nathan approached the first safe and pulled the heavy door open. Gold. Rows upon rows of stamped 1-kilogram Credit Suisse gold bars were stacked like brickwork. The soft, buttery yellow glow reflected in Nathan's wide eyes. The second safe held velvet-lined trays containing dozens of pristine, rare timepieces. He recognized the iconic faces of vintage Patek Philippe chronographs and Rolex Paul Newman Daytonas. To the right of the room was a climate-controlled glass enclosure containing heavy sliding racks. Inside were paintings, masterpieces. Nathan recognized a small, distinctively framed sketch that looked unmistakably like a Rembrandt, and a vibrant landscape that bore the signature of Claude Monet. This wasn't just a bunker, it was a museum of hidden wealth, an empire buried beneath a mountain of rotting wood and family jokes. At the far end of the facility sat a simple steel desk. On top of it rested a leather-bound ledger, a Mont Blanc fountain pen, and a sealed envelope with Nathan written across it in Arlo's shaky, unmistakable cursive. Nathan's hands trembled as he broke the wax seal. He pulled out a single sheet of heavy stationery. "Nathan, if you are reading this, it means you did exactly what I knew you would do. You rolled up your sleeves. You didn't complain, you didn't walk away from a hard task. And you didn't let pride blind you to the work that needed to be done. Your cousins Beatrice and Greg are fools. They measure a man's worth by the tailored cut of his suit and the balance of his checking account. I left them the public assets, the paper wealth. The stock market is volatile. Their money is tied to screens and algorithms. They will likely squander it in a decade. But true wealth, tangible, historical, indestructible wealth, requires protection. It requires respect. I liquidated the core of my fortune in 1998 and spent 20 years building this facility. Everything here is off the books, legally severed from the primary estate and deeded exclusively to the property at 42 Pine Ridge. Whoever holds the deed to the land holds the empire beneath it. The ledger on this desk contains the provenance authentication papers and contact information for the private brokers who helped me assemble this collection. Use them. Clear your debts. Live your life on your own terms. You earned this, my boy. Not by blood, but by character. Arlo tears pricked the corners of Nathan's eyes. He wasn't just wealthy, he was vindicated. The uncle he had quietly cared for hadn't abandoned him. He had chosen him for the greatest gift of all. Nathan knew he couldn't handle this alone. One wrong move, and the IRS, the state government, or his greedy family would descend upon the cabin like a plague of locusts. He needed serious, heavyweight legal counsel. Using the satellite phone, he found charging on Arlo's desk. Nathan called a number, listed in the ledger under Emergency Counsel. Less than 48 hours later, a sleek, black armored SUV pulled up the muddy driveway of the Saranac Lake cabin. Out stepped Jonathan Carmichael, a senior appraisal director from a highly exclusive branch of Sotheby's private sales, accompanied by William H. Bradley, a ruthless top-tier asset protection attorney from Manhattan. When Nathan led them down the rusted spiral staircase and through the breaker switch, both men stopped dead in their tracks. Carmichael, a man who had appraised the estates of billionaires and royalty, actually dropped his leather briefcase. "Mother of God," Carmichael whispered, walking slowly toward the Bugatti. The rumors, in the classic car underground, there were whispers for decades that Arlo Caldwell had acquired the lost Atlantic from a private French estate in the 80s. We all thought it was a myth. For 3 grueling days, Carmichael and his team lived in the bunker, cataloging, verifying, and appraising every single item. Bradley, meanwhile, established a titanium-clad legal fortress around the assets, structuring them into a blind trust with Nathan as the sole beneficiary. On the evening of the 3rd day, Carmichael sat at the steel desk, tallying the final numbers on a legal pad. "Mr. Hayes," Carmichael said, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose, excluding the gold which fluctuates and factoring in the conservative auction estimates for the Bugatti, the Impressionist art, and the horology collection, you are looking at a liquid value of roughly $120 million. Nathan had to sit down on the bottom step of the staircase. He had hoped for enough to pay off his $85,000 debt. Now he was a centimillionaire. "There's just one problem," Bradley interrupted, his sharp eyes narrowing as he looked at Nathan. "You cannot move a $40 million Bugatti and a dozen museum-grade paintings without the world finding out. The moment these assets hit the private market, the Caldwell name will be attached. Your cousins are going to find out. And when they do, it will be war." The secret lasted exactly 3 weeks. The catalyst was the Bugatti. Jonathan Carmichael had quietly brokered a private treaty sale of the vehicle to a Swiss consortium for an astonishing $46 million. But high-end automotive circles are small, and leaks are inevitable. A blog dedicated to ultra-rare vintage cars published a speculative article about the sudden discovery and sale of Arlo Caldwell's legendary lost Bugatti. Greg Hastings saw the article while sitting in his Aspen estate, frantically trying to salvage his failing tech startup. The fallout was immediate and explosive. Within 24 hours, Nathan was served with a massive 70-page civil lawsuit filed by Davies Morgan and Associates, the very firm that had read the will. Greg and Beatrice had banded together, freezing their own dwindling assets to hire a team of vicious corporate litigators. They filed for an emergency injunction, claiming that the contents of the bunker were undisclosed liquid assets and should have been distributed evenly among the heirs. Furthermore, they alleged that Nathan had exerted undue influence on a mentally unfit Arlo to secure the property. The courtroom battle took place in the New York State Supreme Court, presided over by the formidable Judge Eleanor Harrison. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. Greg sat at the plaintiff's table, his bespoke suit looking slightly rumpled, his face red with barely suppressed rage. Beatrice sat beside him, glaring at Nathan with a hatred so pure it practically radiated across the aisle. "Your Honor," Greg's high-priced lawyer argued, pacing before the bench, "Arlo Caldwell's will clearly delineated that liquid and portfolio assets were to go to my clients. The defendant, Mr. Hayes, was granted a cabin, a wooden structure. He was not granted a subterranean vault containing $120 million in untaxed hidden wealth. That is a blatant circumvention of the estate's primary distribution." William H. Bradley stood up, slowly adjusting his suit jacket. He didn't pace. He didn't shout. He approached the bench with the calm certainty of an apex predator. "Your Honor, if opposing counsel had bothered to read the actual property deed that their own clients mocked 3 months ago, we wouldn't be here," Bradley said smoothly, handing a certified document to the bailiff to pass to the judge. "Arlo Caldwell was not a foolish man," Bradley continued. "He anticipated this exact manifestation of greed. The deed for 42 Pine Ridge does not just transfer the surface property. It includes a highly specific, legally binding addendum drafted in 2021. It explicitly grants the deed holder, Nathan Hayes, all subsurface structures, subterranean mineral rights, and the entirety of any and all physical contents contained within said structures, unrestricted and absolute." Judge Harrison adjusted her glasses, reading the document carefully. "This is a standard, albeit heavily fortified real estate transfer. The language is ironclad. Furthermore," Bradley said, turning to look directly at Greg and Beatrice, "I submit to the court Exhibit C. Arlo Caldwell's handwritten letter, authenticated by 2 independent handwriting experts. In it he states unequivocally that the bunker was a deliberate test of character, a test the plaintiffs failed the moment they walked out of the estate reading." Greg stood up, losing all composure. "It's a fraud. He tricked us. That money belongs to the family. He's a broke-line cook. He doesn't deserve it. Mr. Hastings, sit down and remain silent, or I will hold you in contempt." Judge Harrison snapped her gavel, slamming down like a gunshot. The courtroom fell dead silent. Judge Harrison looked at the documents, then at Greg, and finally at Nathan, who sat quietly, exuding a calm, grounded presence. "The court finds no evidence of fraud, undue influence, or ambiguity." Judge Harrison ruled, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "The late Mr. Caldwell's intentions were remarkably clear. The property and the entirety of the subterranean facility and its contents belong solely to Nathan Hayes. The plaintiff's motion is denied. Case dismissed." The strike of the gavel sealed their fates. Beatrice buried her face in her hands, realizing she had just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees for absolutely nothing. Greg stared blankly ahead, the reality setting in that his startup was dead and his Aspen estate would likely go into foreclosure within the year due to his reckless leveraging. Nathan walked out of the courthouse into the crisp New York air. The press was waiting cameras, flashing reporters, shouting questions about the billionaire's bunker. He didn't stop to answer them. He simply climbed into the back of a waiting black town car, William Bradley sliding in next to him. "Where to, Mr. Hayes?" the driver asked. Nathan looked out the window at the bustling city. He had paid off his debts the day the Bugatti funds cleared. He had set up a massive charitable trust to help struggling independent restaurant owners in Chicago. He had everything he could ever want. "Take me to the hardware store," Nathan smiled. "I've got a cabin roof to fix." Blood might be thicker than water, but character is the only currency that truly lasts. If Nathan's incredible journey from mockery to millions inspired you, hit that like button right now. It proves that hard work and a good heart always win in the end. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family, only to prove them absolutely wrong? Drop your story in the comments below. We love reading them. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who needs some motivation, and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable true stories.